Hey guys, Jay here from the Legion of Two, and for this video I've decided to do something a bit more light-hearted than controversial, although I suppose it could be classed as controversial considering it's my top 5 favourite Heresy books. So just a wee heads up, this will contain spoilers for the 5 books I have chosen, and they are entirely subjective, so if you don't like them, that's fair enough. Put down in the comments what were your top 5 and the reasons for such, and we'll get a bit of a discourse going. So for number 5, I've went with Deliverance Lost. It's a book that focuses on the Raven Guard, which was really needed at that point in time to give a few more interesting aspects of their lore, more than what, say, a Codex would provide, or even the Index Astartes, because back in the earlier days of the Heresy, before we had the establishment of the novels or the Black Books, all we really had was that they were slaughtered at Istvan, they tried to make the Wergeld, and it all went wrong. But with this book and the prequel short story that came before it and the audio Raven's Flight, Gav Thorpe really takes the time to get invested in Corax as a relatable character, not just a Primarch. He does doubt himself. His perspective is that he really does care for his men. He gets mad when they're slaughtered, and he does like to get his hands dirty. The scene where he gets to speak with the Emperor is also very touching, as we see the Primarch at the end of his rope. He's at a loss of everything, really. He's lost over 70,000 warriors on Istvan and has made the rather arduous trip to Terra so that he can speak with the Emperor in hopes of getting the technology needed to bring more Space Marines into being so that they can launch a counterattack against the traitors. How he even speaks to the Emperor is quite interesting and is quite open to interpretation, because you could argue that the Emperor himself comes and speaks to him through the psychic link, or is it the Corax is transferred psychically to the Emperor's presence? But either way, the Emperor bestows upon him the knowledge needed to get fresh Space Marines created and into the fight. The remainder of the book itself also gives a wide variety of interesting battles and interesting characters. Seeing the sort of guerrilla raid that the Raven Guard did against the Wordbearers when they were testing out how the new generation of Space Marines that they dub the Raptors, how they work and how they're superior to their standard brethren, really does show that the gene seed that the Primarch got with the help of Vincente VI and some Adeptus Mechanicus and them working with it, removing all the aspects that were from other Primarchs, is quite interesting to see that there was originally just one large template and the Emperor used certain aspects to create the legions that we see. As stated earlier on, the dynamic as well between Corax and his sons is also very, very good in this book. You get to see it from the point of view of several characters, but 2 of my personal favourites would be Navarre Heth, which is a young man who's trying to make his way into the Legion, and he is lucky, shall we say, that he is inducted into the Raptors, but unfortunately is given a mutated gene seed which turns him into basically one of the Wergeld, because at this point in time, unbeknownst to Corax, a few Alpha Legion members have managed to infiltrate his legion and use some sorcery, for lack of a better word, to not only take the mind and images of some of the men they've killed, but they've also taken the faces and the armor. So these infiltrators have tried their best to merge into the Raven Guard, and in one instance, one of them is actually one of the senior Lord Commanders of the Raven Guard. So the sort of B-plot in the book is Agapito and Bran at some points trying to figure out who is the infiltrator, because they're seeing certain things happen, or they're hearing certain things, or people say certain things that does not correlate to what they've done. One of the major examples is that Agapito hears one of the Alpha Legion infiltrators, who is taking over the face of a guy called Nistil, mention the Phalanx and how he saw it once in battle, but the Raven Guard had never fought beside the Imperial Fists, so how would he know what the Phalanx is? So that was a nice little twist. You know, you would think that that's just a little cutaway bit or a little random line in a book that someone's just used it to fill it, but it actually leads to much, much more. The second character that I find quite interesting in this book is Commander Bran. He was one of the senior commanders of the Raven Guard, but during the Battle of Istvan, he had to get the dubious honour of staying behind to guard Ravendelve. Now, he is instrumental in rescuing the Primarch from Istvan, and is given the honour of commanding the Raptors. But there is a aspect of friction in that, because the Space Marines who survived the Battle of Istvan are very wary now of their brothers and are very close-knit, to the point in which that anybody who was at Istvan will wear a small grey skull on their armour to show that they're veterans of Istvan and that they served. And this has sort of created a dynamic between those who were at Istvan to those who weren't. While it does have some standout fights in regards to the Raven Guard, for example, like assaulting the Perfect Fortress, it isn't as big and as grandiose as some of the books that had already been created, and that works for the Raven Guard because at this point in time they don't have a legion's worth of troops to use. They only have the 4,000 to 5,000 that have either been inducted in from the Raptors or that escaped Istvan. It does show a very different dynamic in the sense of this, that they're doing their guerrilla raids, they're trying their best, and that this is their way of fighting the heresy. They're not going to stand on the walls of the Imperial Palace. They're going to do what they can behind the lines to really annoy Horus. My number 4 on this is Garrow. Now, Garrow is technically a written compilation of all the audiobooks that were written about the character Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard, who is personally one of my favourite characters in all the Heresy. But the nice little twist in this instance is that even if you have listened to all the audiobooks, Garrow, the novel itself, is still worth a read. As it changes the medium of audio to written, it allows an additional insight into the story, with various additions made to, I wouldn't say pad out the book, but to just give you greater depth. An example of this would be the Garrow audio Ashes of Fealty, which was the story of Garrow stopping Merrick Voyan from bringing in the stasis casket that contained the remains of Sol and Decius, who had turned into the Lord of Flies. Now, in the audio, the creature manages to escape and Garrow manages to destroy it, but we see that Merrick Voyan is bitten by one of Nurgle's flies. And it just sort of ends there. The book goes a wee bit further, and instead of it just ending with him seeing the 3 little dots of the mark of Nurgle on his skin and beginning to worry, we then see the sort of next part of that, which cuts to Garrow essentially walking to the Arvis Lighter to meet Tylos Rubio and cleaning his sword, which means that he has basically dealt with another one of his brothers. What also makes this rather noteworthy is that it's all done by James Swallow. He has been the writer of every single Garrow audio or Garrow standalone aspect, and brings a much needed consistency to a single character rather than the write by committee aspect that Black Library mostly has. So for my number 3 choice, I went with Flight of the Eisenstein. Following on from the previous book, this is the real beginning of Garrow's story, elevating him from a side character essentially to a protagonist. The book has a lot to live up to, coming off Galaxy in Flames' momentum, and James Swallow does it quite beautifully, with a high stakes story involving multiple POV characters that are all quite distinctive, in which Garrow has to travel to Terra from Istvan 3 to basically warn the Emperor of Horus's treachery. The main villain of the story is Ignatius Grolgor, and it should also be mentioned that, like Garrow, he is basically just a side character, but he is elevated to be a rather annoying, persistent threat in this book. While Garrow is a bit of a straight arrow follower of the Emperor and a true loyalist at heart, Ignatius is a rather spiteful, barbarian individual. He does have quite a satisfying end, in a sense, when he accidentally exposes himself to the Life Eater virus, but has a rather nice twist that he does return as essentially the first Plague Marine. So even though Garrow thinks he's defeated him one time, he does keep coming back with a vengeance. Despite the story essentially being a bottle episode, it does have some amazing set pieces, in particular the climactic battle between Garrow and the infected Solon Decius, who became the Lord of Flies on Luna's surface. It's only a hop, skip, and a jump in a way from Garrow's destination, and yet he is so close and so far to getting to what he needs to see. But once Solon is defeated, he is rewarded with, in a sense, an audience with Malcador, who informs him that he does need men of a inquisitive nature to assist him in his efforts. So the story does essentially bookend one, but opens up another. We know that the Emperor has been warned, Rogel Dorn has been informed, everyone knows of Horus's treachery, and the wider battle of the Imperium can go ahead. But in the instance of Garrow, one life has ended, another has just begun. Coming in at number 2 for me is Vengeful Spirit by Graham McNeil. This story to me fully reestablishes the momentum of the Heresy story. While the books that immediately preceded this one were okay, Marked of Calth, Vulcan Lives, The Unremembered Empire, Scars, as I say, they were all good stories, but they really did little to advance the overarching narrative. I'll be honest with you, if you're not really interested in the legions that feature in those stories, you're not really that fussed in potentially even getting through the book, and you could potentially find them a slog. So it's nice to see that in this one, you're seeing the Sons of Horus come back to the forefront and going back into the fight that basically was started at Istvan. It refocuses the story on Horus as the main villain, which it should be considering it is technically his heresy. We hadn't really seen him do anything in the sense of warfare for quite some time, and off the top of my head, the last thing I can really remember him doing is peeling the face of Erebus in Fear to Tread, which was roughly 8 books before this. The crux of the story is that Horus is going to attack a planet called Molech, which is very, very heavily defended by the Imperials. But for the life of them, none of them can figure out why so many Imperials would be needed to defend a planet that is relatively insignificant. The B-plot really is also about Loken, rescued off Istvan 3 by Captain Garrow in one of his audio stories. You see Loken and the Knights Errant infiltrate Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, during the Battle of Molech in an attempt to mark the ship with runes and trackers and tracing beacons, so that when Leman Russ is ready, he can launch his assault, which comes up in a later book, and attempt to defeat Horus before he can reach Terra. The book manages the difficult balancing act of taking time to set up some upcoming plots, such as Mortarion beginning to dabble with the ruinous powers, while also including the plot threads from previous books in some way that can all bring them back to the mainstream. An example being Grolgor is returned to Mortarion after he makes a sacrifice so that he can assist with the destruction of the planet. But personally, by far, the most interesting aspect for me was the use of Captain Loken and the Knights Errant. It's the first time we ever see them act as a sort of cohesive squad. You do get a rather interesting look at each person by the fact that each one of them will carry a token of their parent legion, just as a little reminder of who they were, but they now wear the uniform grey with the mark of the sigillite to show that even though, for example, Tylos Rubio once carried a Gladius, he's now a Knight Errant of Malcador. It also does show a wide variety of recruits. You know, we do see characters like Tylos Rubio, Macer Varen, Roman Carrion. There's also a White Scar, an Iron Warrior. So you do also have that traitor element as well that Malcador recruited the best of any legion, no matter where they were from, to show that all that matters is the loyalty to the Emperor, not the legion you came from. One noteworthy moment is when a captured Ultramarine is about to be turned into one of the Luperci by Sergar Targost, and Loken specifically orders the Raven Guard, Knight Errant Roman Carrion, to essentially take him out before this occurs. So the Raven Guard manages to shoot the traitor through the head, bringing him down and rescuing the Ultramarine. And they believe that is that aspect dealt with. They haven't managed to alert any other traitors, and they know that one of the senior commanders is dealt with, as Sergar was the Lodge Master. But it's all given a nice twist when he actually sits up, rips the throat out of the Knight Errant next to him, and reveals that he is actually Samos, and potentially has been for quite some time. Twists aside, the personal stakes in the story are fantastic. Loken meeting Horus face to face again is a highlight, as you will see exactly why the Space Wolf Bror Tearfinger was ordered to keep an eye on Loken, as they believed he could potentially falter in his loyalties when seeing his Primarch once again, and potentially go back to being a true son of Horus. And Eacton Cruz's death at the hands of Horus has to be one of the most symbolic and rather sad moments, I believe, in the Heresy. To see this old warrior, one of the very earliest sons of Horus, back then when they were obviously Lunar Wolves, he was called the Half-Herd because nobody really wanted to listen to him anymore. To see him fall before Horus really shows that Horus is no longer what any of the loyal sons of Horus, i.e. Captain Loken, believed him to be, and it results in him completely breaking free of any spell that Horus may have had him under. This cult of personality that Horus has is completely broken, and Loken is now just set in stone that he will fight Horus every way possible, every planet, up until he gets to Terra, just to make sure he can't. And for my number one choice, most people were probably expecting Betrayer, Angels Exterminatus, The First Heretic. And while they are all fantastic books, for me it has to be Galaxy in Flames. Galaxy in Flames to me is where the Heresy actually finally kicks off properly. In a way, the first three books could be seen as one essentially very long story, with Horus Rising being the establishment of the narrative we're reading. False Gods was the gradual degradation of the characters that we had seen in the first book, and Galaxy in Flames is essentially the conclusion. It is the climax of Horus's initial betrayal. In the book, we get to see the Battle of Istvan III in all its glory. There is a creeping sense of dread in the initial chapters, which is worsened by the fact the reader knows what is going to happen. A great moment in the book is when a Marine notices that when they're being deployed for the attack on Istvan, because they believed it has seceded from the Imperium, they're not being deployed in the standard way. They're not going by company. They're going by squad. It does show the influence that the Primarchs have over their troops, telling them, for example, that they have been selected for this mission personally, really inflates the Marines' pride and avoids some of the questions that they may ask as to why they're being deployed without certain men beside them. One of the other small little tidbits that would also arouse suspicion is that even though the Emperor's children are here, they're led by Commander Eidolon, not Fulgrim himself. So you would begin to wonder, where is Fulgrim at this moment in time? By the time someone, namely Saul Tarvitz, does indeed figure out that they have been betrayed, it is chilling to see that he can't even grasp the enormity of what is about to happen. That their own Primarchs could betray them is almost unthinkable, but he still follows through with warning the troops on the ground that they have been betrayed. So he steals a Thunderhawk and makes his way to the surface in an attempt to radio or physically tell the troops down there that they're about to be virus bombed. This would also be the first time in the Heresy that Horus fails, and it could be argued that it is his failure to ensure that every base is covered, shall we say, for the future of his plans. Because in this instance, Angron does slip the leash. He cannot bombard the planet to wipe out the remaining loyal forces, as Angron has basically led a drop pod assault to kill them personally. This delay in Horus's plan gives the loyalists time to essentially create defenses, allow Garrow to escape, and hope that if they can just hold out, the Imperials, hopefully some sort of retribution fleet, will arrive in time to save them so that they can all finally then defeat Horus once and for all. As well as the overall importance to the Heresy narrative, the tension that has been building in this book and over the two previous books finally comes to a head, with the Mournival having their fight inside some ruined citadel and resulting in the death of Tarek Torgadon and Captain Loken being buried in a pile of rubble, and at that point in time, presumed dead. Personally, at this point, I did assume that Loken was actually dead. He was, to me, just a POV character that was written to get newcomers into the Heresy, because it had been around for quite some time and he did not exist in the original lore. But he did seem to become such a fan favourite amongst most of the Heresy fan base that he ended up being resurrected, for lack of a better word, in the Garrow audio Legion of One. And from there, his story just continued on. While I know some people out there are not a fan of Ben Counter, and I do get that, the Battle for the Abyss was not great by any stretch of the imagination. There is an unverified rumour floating about that Graham McNeil actually wrote the last 2/3 of Galaxy in Flames when Ben Counter either couldn't or wouldn't. In the end though, regardless of who wrote it, I still find it being one of my favourite Heresy books that I would either read time and time again or listen to time and time again. And the idea of creating a loyalist Istvan 3 army for the Forge World Heresy game always pops up in my agenda. I can just never bring it through. Well, that's it, guys. My top 5. Tell me what you think. Did you like some of them? Did you have a completely different 5 in mind? Stick the 5 that you consider your top 5 favourites in the comments below. And as usual, if you like the content, please like, share, subscribe, and do all that usual stuff. Thanks now. Bye-bye.